Hello everyone, I'm your host Creator Toast, and a feeling I think all artists have had at least once in their life is the feeling of not improving. Now, as someone who's been drawing for around 17 years, I have definitely felt this a time or two. However, I've compiled a list of things that have helped me out when drawing, and hopefully it will help you out. This is something that can be applied to pretty much anyone, no matter their art skill. So without further ado, here are 8 tips that you can use to improve your art. Tip number 1 is to use guidelines. If art was like building, guidelines would be the foundation. You need the proper foundation to build a proper house. The same with art, you need the proper guidelines in order to make a proper art piece. Once you become skilled enough, you definitely can make art without guidelines, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Guidelines, while it may seem like an extra step at first, makes things easier for you in the long run. However, telling you to use guidelines when you don't know what guidelines are or how to use them seems pretty pointless, so I will explain what they are and how to use them. Here I've drawn a standard head with a line down the middle representing the middle of the face. From here you can split that up into 3 sections. Top section is the circle drawn for the base of the head. The middle section is where the circle ends to where the jawline begins, and the bottom is just the jawline. From here I like to split the circle in half. This is not where the eyes go. If you put the eyes here, the eyes will be too up high on the head, and there will be no forehead, and we like it when our characters have foreheads. At least that's my preference. Next, you're going to split it where the circle reaches the second section. And inside the 2 lines you've created is the area which you can place your eyes. This allows for a little room for stylization if you want to make big eyes or really small eyes. Where your center line meets the circle is where your nose is going to be. You can denote it with whatever shape you want, I just chose a little circle. Where your bottom section meets your middle section is where your mouth is going to go. If your character has an open mouth, you would draw the head longer in order to account for the space your open mouth is taking up. And then from there, you can draw your hairline, which should be in the middle of the very top of your section. Number 2 is to use chunkier brushes for your sketch. And I'm not just saying this for aesthetic reasons. In my experience, chunky brushes tend to sketch better and look neater. It also helps with the readability of your sketches. While the readability of the sketches only matter if you can understand them, using chunkier brushes can actually help when it comes to cleaning up your sketch later. Here I am drawing 2 basic skeletons to put my tip to the test. The first one will be drawn with a chunky brush, and the second one will be drawn with a thin brush. I'm going to try to say relatively the same amount zoomed out on each one so that way one doesn't have an unfair advantage over the other. I actually ended up having to redo this test one time because I zoomed in too much for one side and I was like, no, that's unfair. I want both sides to have fair testing. I need both sides to be tested fairly. No unfairness here. Though I've only drawn the 2 skeletons at this point in the test, I still prefer the chunky one, but that could just be me being biased. Like I said earlier, I wanted to stay zoomed out so both will have equal testing opportunities. And all I'm really doing for both of them is going to be drawing the same face. And yes, I already know I'm so cool because I can draw the other eye. Man, if you ever hear me talking like that in public, smack me. It's pretty much just a default face in my style. I didn't want to do anything too extravagant just to make testing easier. Over on the thin brush side, you can already see how much line variation differs. It's much harder being zoomed out putting my pencil down on the same exact spot, leaving this really weird sketchy look. This can make it much more difficult for line art and rendering because you might not know exactly where you need to put a line because your sketch is so sketchy. Like I said earlier, the only thing that matters is that you are able to read your sketch, but it can definitely help to have a neater sketch when it comes to your line art and rendering phases. Unfortunately, due to the sketchiness, Homegirl ends up looking a little traumatized, and is looking much worse for wear than the thick pen sketch. Even though I believe I proved my point, I finished up the rest of the sketch. I noticed I definitely got the chunkier sketch done first. I think it's because I'm more used to drawing with a thicker brush than a thinner one. But it is definitely much easier to draw with a thicker brush zoomed out more. Since we're on the topic of sketches already, tip number 3 is to define your sketches before line art and rendering. I'll even give an example with an art piece that I'm working on currently. This is a redrawing I'm doing because I wanted to measure my improvement. And as you can see, the sketch is really defined. This is what the whole thing looks without color. Now I'm going to show you the messy sketch. And I don't know about you, but I definitely think it is much easier to place everything and color on the refined sketch. Tip number 5 is to hue shift when you're choosing colors for shading or highlighting. If you don't know what hue shifting is, don't worry, I'll explain it and show an example in a bit. And it's actually how I'm shading my drawing in the background. I personally think this method looks more lively, but if you need something quick and simple, shading with purple and a multiply layer will work too. Now on to the explanation. Here I chose 2 skin tones to use for this example. And for the top 2, I'm going to shade them how some people do, where you just take a bit of a darker color and shade it with that. And I'm going to do the same with highlights, but with a lighter color. And while there's not necessarily anything wrong with shading this way, I do think it ends up looking a little flat. I didn't need to blend them out for this demonstration, but I did because I'm extra like that. And now it's time for the bottom 2 ones. And what I'm going to do, instead of picking a color that's just darker, I'm going to go to the outside of the color wheel and shift the hue a little bit. I like to shift the color towards the nearest cool colors if I'm doing shadows and to the nearest warm colors for highlights, but that can change based off of setting and lighting. I personally find the bottom 2 to be much more vibrant and lively. In my personal opinion, the lighter skin tone looks a little muddy. I'm saying it again, in my personal opinion, it looks muddy. If you like it, it is completely fine and keep doing what you're doing. I'm not here to boss you around, I'm just here telling you what works for me, really. If you don't like this method, there is one color I 100% suggest you always do this with, and that color is yellow. While I love yellow, it is notorious in the art community for being one of the hardest colors to properly shade. For whatever reason, yellow is super hard to darken properly and just can end up looking muddy and green. So even if you don't like this tip, please just do it on yellow. That is the only thing I require. I beg, use it on yellow, please. My 5th tip for you is to use references and or bases. Now, I've talked briefly in the past about how I believe references are not cheating. It's not cheating to need to look at something in order to draw it properly. But I do know that some people also think bases are cheating, and I'm here to also debunk that. Bases aren't cheating for 2 reasons. One being they are also a form of reference, and like I said earlier, references aren't cheating. And 2, artists literally make them for people just to slap their own art on top. And heck, if you're so opposed to tracing the base, just use it like you would a reference. But what if you're not really the best at copying references yet, and you can't get the pose exactly how you want it? But you also don't want a carbon copy of the base. So here are a few quick tips to using a base. Number 1, make sure that the artist is credited somewhere. That's a very big one. The base I'm going to be using for today's example is by Unknown Spy. And number 2, make sure it's a free-to-use base. Some artists have paid bases that you can pay to use. I do believe that this is a free-to-use base because I haven't seen anything about paying. Want more individuality in the base? What you can do is use the base to form your basic skeleton instead of just tracing it. When you're making your basic skeleton, make sure to add hints of your own style into it. For example, this base only has a circle for a head, but I always draw chins on my character, so I added a chin. My characters don't tend to be as slim as this character, so I added some more mass to them. Things like that. Doing this will not only help you draw poses similar to this in the future, but it will also give your art a sense of individuality and feel more unique to you. And always remember, if you trace a base, please credit the artist that made the base. It's just common courtesy, really. Now I'm going to switch over to a speed paint to show you the process a little faster. After you're done loosely tracing the base, you can fix it up a little bit, maybe fix up the sketch, or add more things that'd be stylistic choices that you would make. Because this is a quick example, I didn't feel the need to do that too much. And now you're able just to draw on top of your sketch as if it was your own art. I've used bases a few times in my life, not too often really, but I have noticed a significant difference if I do use a base doing it this method rather than just tracing and slapping my art over top of it. Here are the 2 drawings side by side. Looking at them, I feel like you would only know if I used a base if you were familiar with the original one. And to me, this is my opinion, it looks like 2 different artists drew the same pose in their own style. But I also think it helped that I changed the facial expression instead of using the same one. Using a base this way can actually help you learn how to draw similar poses like this in the future, and also helps the art look more unique to you. As long as you're not solely reliant on bases to help you draw, this method can actually help out quite a lot. Coming in at number 6 is to look into color theory. I'm not saying you need to fully understand all the different color wheels, how they work, how all the colors interact with each other, but having a decent understanding of how colors look together is what I'm talking about. For example, blue and purple look good paired together because they're neighbors on the color wheel. However, colors like purple and green are a little harder to pair together. It can be done, it's just a bit more difficult. Take Daphne from Scooby-Doo for example. Girl's been rocking this look since the 60s. And if I'm being honest, Daphne was the one that made me love purple and green as a combination together, so... Let's say, for example, you have two colors that don't look good together at all, but you have your heart set on using them both. There's a very simple way to make your color palette look more cohesive. And all you have to do is think about your character's default environment and tint the colors to look similar. In my example, I'm using blue, so we're going to say my characters are underwater. Just by putting that swatch of blue over top, I have unified the two colors and made them match better. This method helps if you're not the best at picking colors yet, or if you're having trouble putting together a cohesive color palette. This method can also be used to help differentiate characters that might live in different environments. Using my water example again, if I made a character who lived in a fiery area, I could use orange to unify the colors, which could help show that a character is not in their natural environment if one of the two characters were to go over to the other one. Tip number 7 is to not zoom in all the way if you are drawing digitally. Sorry, traditional artists, y'all are excluded from this one. Zooming in is completely fine if you need to get small details done or are having trouble seeing a certain spot of your canvas. However, zooming in while working on larger parts of your canvas can actually make the whole thing look a little wonky. Here I have two skeletons with half the face already drawn on them. For one of them, I'm going to be zooming in all the way when I draw the other eye, and for the other one, I'm going to stay zoomed out. Notice how the other eye is definitely more wonky compared to the first one. Because I was so zoomed in, I couldn't reference the first eye properly, which led to me not knowing where the eye should relatively sit on the face. With this face, however, I am going to stay a bit more zoomed out, and I'm going to reference the other eye while drawing. This will allow me to draw another eye that doesn't look wonky on the face. While this eye isn't perfect, it definitely looks much better than the one I drew zoomed all the way in. Again, it's okay to zoom in when you need to work on smaller parts of the canvas. However, when it comes to larger details, it's best to stay more zoomed out. And my last tip for the day is going to be pretty self-explanatory. Tip number 8 is to draw frequently. Let's be honest with ourselves, we can't get better if we don't continue to draw. You're gonna improve much more if you draw every day compared to once a week. It's unfair to yourself to try and compare yourself to artists who have been drawing for much longer than you have. Especially when you've only been drawing, say, a year, when they've been drawing 5. And here's a small mini tip for you. If you're feeling stuck in your art, and you don't feel like you're improving, or you're not liking it, try mixing up the medium you're using. If pencil and paper doesn't feel like it's working with you, try mixing it up. Try going with acrylics, or maybe oil pastels, or charcoal. If none of those work, try digital art. Sometimes all it takes is a mix of material. While most of my work is digital art, nothing beats going back to a sketchbook every once in a while to sketch. Each medium has its own unique feel, and it's good to experiment with that. I hope I explained all my tips well enough, and I hope that maybe I told you something you didn't already know. Again, these are all things that I just did that helped me improve. It might not help everybody. Also, implementing these isn't magically going to make you an art god overnight. It's gonna take some practice. These are just tips that I think would help improve them just even a little bit. Always remember that art is subjective, and as long as you're having fun and you like what you're doing, it doesn't matter what I or anybody else says. I tried my best to come up with a list of tips that I haven't heard that often or I haven't even heard at all. Minus the last one, of course. Everyone says you need to draw frequently, but it is really important too. So I hope I helped learn you a thing or two. If you're interested in more videos like this, please let me know. I probably have some more tips and tricks stored somewhere in my brain. And if you have any more tips yourself, leave them in the comments. I'd love to see what I missed, and maybe you might teach me something. Quick funny story about the art in the background. I didn't realize it went against one of my tips when I put it as the drawing for the background. And the funny thing is I was specifically looking for old art that I didn't define the sketch with for that point. And then I chose this speed paint for the background, and then I realized, oh my gosh, it goes against exactly what I said. So if the audio ever sounds weird or odd at all throughout this entire video, I do apologize. I have a microphone and it's a bit of a learning curve. If I'm too close to it, you hear my mouth sounds. If I'm too far away, you can't hear me at all. So I'm trying my best and I'm learning. I have used this microphone in the past before, but I kind of avoided using it now. My computer is pretty old and is on its last limbs, so it didn't work well with my computer. I was pretty discouraged on trying to use it for a while. And then I learned it was compatible with my phone, and I freaked out when I learned that because I was like, oh my gosh, I can use my microphone. It does have a few quirks that I'm learning about still, but I hope it works out okay. What inspired me to try my microphone again was actually this comment I got on a more recent video, where apparently the audio only worked in one side of the headset, and I was like, oh boy, I didn't know that because I only have one working earbud. So I hoped using an actual mic might actually help with that. I'll find out when I edit this. Anyway, I hope you all really enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in the next one. This was Creator Toast signing off. Have a good day!